Manny here once again. Welcome back to DFS Zone, your source for daily fantasy sport lineup advice for the NFL and NBA. Got a brand new video for you guys. We're going to discuss Week 7 of the NFL running back picks. But before I get started with the video, like always, I appreciate you guys drop a like. And if you're new to the channel, have not as of yet subscribed to the channel, please do so down below. Make sure you put on that bell icon right next to the subscribe button. Make sure that is clicked on so this way you do not miss out on any of my NFL or NBA lineup advice videos as well as live shows. All right, with that being said, man, let's go right to it. We have the 10-game slate this week. We're going to discuss only running backs in this video. And first things first, like always, I always go over my plays from the week prior. So last week I gave you guys three running backs, and I made one change on Saturday night. That's why it's important to come to the live show, because if I decide to change on one of the players, I will announce it on Saturday night as we have our final look at everything. But I gave you guys James Conner last week. He was my top running back. He was 26.9 fantasy points he put up for us. So if you put James Conner in there and then you grab either Matt Ryan or Jameis Winston out of my quarterbacks, you would have done very, very well for yourself last week with just those first two picks. My next pick was Joe Mixon. He was 16.4 fantasy points last week. I had changed him for Jordan Howard. I had originally Jordan Howard, and then I wasn't too sure. And then at the end of Saturday, before Saturday night, during the video, I told you guys that I definitely loved Joe Mixon. He turned out to be a pretty decent play as well. My worst play of the day was that I kept myself with Chris Carson of the Seattle Seahawks, and he only put up 5.9 fantasy points. So a bad play there. So hopefully not a whole lot of you went on Mr. Carson, but Joe Mixon and James Conner were excellent. So I think my running picks for last week were not too bad. I would hate to give three guys and they're all three bummed out. It can happen, as I tell you time and time again. Anything can happen any given Sunday, especially in the NFL. But my three quarterbacks came out great last week, and my three picks, 2 out of the 3 for the running back position is not too bad. So that's basically it, man. So let's go over the picks for this week. I mean, first guy is right here, right at the top, man. There's no way. I barely have ever selected Todd Gurley and discuss him. This is a week that I'm just going to go with him, even though San Francisco is fairly decent against the run defense. They haven't faced Todd Gurley, man. It's just they haven't faced this kind of offensive line. So Todd Gurley to me at 10,200, because I find value at quarterback this week. And like I discussed, if you saw my quarterback video, if you didn't, definitely check out my quarterback video. I discussed there that I got my eye on a couple of other value plays, which I will discuss Saturday night as well. There is an opportunity here to lock in Gurley on here on Fanduel as well as on DK. He's 10,200 here. He's 9,800 on DK. Obviously the most expensive, actually the #1 running back in the NFL, no doubt about it. He comes in as the leading rusher, 103.8 yards per game, 11 touchdowns this year, averaging 27, I could say consider that 28 fantasy points per game, and he has smashed that over the last 2 weeks. I always tell you, look at the fantasy points, and if he's somewhere near his average or doing better, you're definitely going to have him in your radar, any player for that matter, as far as fantasy points. 208 massive yards last week. Obviously, that's one of the reasons why Jared Goff didn't have to go off, but this because this man right here just rushed for 28. I mean, he had 32 rushes. What is 32 touches? 33 touches last week. I mean, that's crazy. 33 touches last week. And if you calculate how many times he touches the ball here, he has had about an average of 27 touches per game. When you have that kind of usage, I mean, you just can't pass up a guy like this. So granted, thank goodness the guy's been holding up and he's not been injured. Obviously, he's in great shape. He has a great offensive line. He doesn't get banged around a whole lot either, because when he gets openings and he's able to get in the open field, there's not too many guys tackling this guy. You know, so he has been just a true beast. He's been the true beast mode as far as the running game this year in the NFL. So, I mean, that's not much to say. Look at that. He's had 3 100-plus yard games, and he had 5 touchdowns over the last 2 games, a total of 11 altogether. 9 of them rushing, 2 of them actually receiving. It's just, again, he's just unbelievable. He's had 5 20-plus yard rushes, which is tied for third in the NFL. In the red zone, he's been pretty good. 74% rush percentage, 37 rushes for 111 yards inside the 20 with 9 touchdowns. Inside the 10, he's at 92%. So they definitely just give it to him and pound it in there with Mr. Gurley the more closer they get to the goal line. Inside the 10, 26 rushes, 53 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 91% rush percentage inside the 5. He's had 11 rushes for 6 yards and 6 TDs. So out of his 9 TDs, he's gotten his 6 inside the 5. They keep pounding him. So the only reason I bring in the inside the 5-yard line is because I saw that he was very, very effective inside the 5 as well. So that comes to show us that they'll run this guy between the tackles for 3 downs inside the goal line if they have to. And why wouldn't they? He's the top runner in the league. So I love Mr. Todd Gurley here again this week against San Francisco. San Francisco coming in, they're 14th in the NFL in rushing defense, allowing a 98.2 yards per game. So obviously they've been doing a little bit better than what Todd Gurley has been actually putting out. But again, like I said, I got to see it to believe it. And right now, San Francisco, I don't think they could be able to neutralize Todd Gurley to the point that he will not get at least 100 yards or more than 150 all-purpose yards. They come in here, they're averaging 4 yards per rush, their opponents are, and you've got a young man who's averaging here nearly 5 yards a rush. So I kind of like those numbers. Versus running backs, I'm looking at this as far as fantasy points against running backs and as well as receiving, because this guy is a dual threat back. He definitely gets his touches from out of the backfield as well as getting those rushes between the tackles. But versus running backs, they've given up the 12th most fantasy points per game, 27.3 DK points, 23.3 Fanduel points. And then here we have, again, when you go and look at the numbers for Todd Gurley, as you can see here above, he's averaging 27.6. That is actually exceeding what they normally give up. But they're giving up. He's pretty much putting up just as much as what they've been giving up. So there is room for him to get at least 27 against this team because they've been giving that up on a regular basis already. Versus wide receivers, and I bring that up because he does catch his ball out of the backfield. They've given up the 9th most fantasy points to receivers, 40.7 DK and 32.7 Fanduel points respectively. In the red zone's defense, their red zone defense has been coughing up 60% of the time. Opponents are been scoring a touchdown. Opponents have been getting in the red zone on the 49ers 4 times per game, getting 2 touchdowns and a field goal out of it. The Rams offense coming in, surprisingly, 56.6% conversion ratio in the red zone, which is really a big surprise, but also leads me to believe that they have had more touchdowns beyond the red zone, meaning that they have caught balls beyond 20 yards and ran them in and got them in the end zone for touchdowns. So 5 opportunities a game is a lot of opportunities for an offense. 5 opportunities a game these guys average, and they've only been putting in 2 touchdowns and a field goal. But again, I think they're in a good position here to get maybe 1 or 2 touchdowns from Todd Gurley on the ground and be able to also get a touchdown or 2 from Mr. Goff through the air. So I definitely love Todd Gurley. So Todd Gurley is one of my top backs. The next guy I'm going to talk about is Mr. Sony Michel. I like Sony Michel this week. Sony Michel, 7,300 here. He is 5,500 on DK. Definitely like his price on DK. Over here, the price, it's okay. I'm not loving it, but I think the matchup is pretty good. Going up against Chicago simply because Chicago, again, even though they've been that good defensively, it's just like the Baltimore thing. I really want to see if they can really handle this. This kid is starting to show that he's really the running game for New England as far as between the tackles. And then, of course, they got the passing back with Mr. James White. But here, again, 9th in rushing in the NFL thus far this year. He's had 91 rushes for 400 yards, averaging 4.4 yards per rush. He's had 2 100-yard games, as you can see here, pretty much almost a third one here. In the last 3 games, he's had 4 rushing TDs. All right, 4 rushing TDs, and he's averaging 13.5 fantasy points per game, and he's exceeded that 3 straight games at 17, 17, and 22. So I love where this is going, and as you can see, the touches, 25 in the last game, 19 in the game prior to that, 25 the game before that. And then, of course, at the beginning of the year, he did, he got 12, and he had 17 in game 2. So slowly but surely, they've been giving him more and more of the football, and now it seems like he is their main back as far as running between the tackles. I really like this whole situation. Also, the other thing I also like about Sonny Michel is they do definitely utilize him in the red zone. So as long as New England gets him within that 20-yard line, they're going to pound it a little bit with Sony Michel. Red zone opportunity, 63% rushing percentage in the red zone as far as rushing percentage. 21 rushes, 49 yards, 3 touchdowns. Inside the 10, he's at 73%. It actually increases by 10% more when they get even closer. 14 rushes, 25 yards, 3 touchdowns. So that means the 3 touchdowns have all been within the 10 yards. And then go even further inside the 5, he's had a 77% rush percentage. So he's actually been even increased more. We know then that he is a guy that's going to run between the tackles and try to get in the end zone every opportunity to get in the red zone. 7 rushes, 7 yards, 2 touchdowns. So out of the 3 touchdowns in the entire red zone of 20 yards, he has had 2 out of those 3 inside the 5. So they definitely love Sony Michel. Chicago, 4th in the NFL in rushing defense, only giving up 83.4 yards per game, but they have not faced a pretty good running back or running backs as far as a duel like James White and Sony Michel. The only running back that they gave up a big yardage to was the running back they faced last week, who is an older running back in Frank Gore, who put up 101 rushing yards last week against the Bears, against the Bears, and he's the only guy. They have actually played against Arizona, Seattle, Green Bay, and Tampa Bay, and none of their running backs put over 100 yards. And last week, Frank Gore did put up 101. He had a very, very good game. This kid has been averaging nearly pretty much 100 yards over the course of the last 3 games. I think he has an excellent shot here to pound it between the tackles and do very, very well against the Chicago Bears. We're going to be able to see how well Chicago is going to respond to a situation like this where they have 2 very good running backs that definitely complement one another. Versus the running backs, they have given up the least amount of fantasy points to running backs thus far this year. 15 DK and 12.4 Fanduel points. That is really, really low. But again, in my opinion, I need to see them be able to neutralize 2 good backs like this, and we're going to see if that's going to happen this week. In the red zone, the opponents have been scoring 50% of the time on the Bears. 2 opportunities per game. Surprisingly, the Bears are not getting, a lot of people are not getting in the red zone against the Bears. They've had 2 opportunities per game, opponents, and only scoring 1 touchdown. That's where the 50% comes from. But again, I really still like the matchup. Sony Michel is definitely someone that I am definitely going to have some exposure to this week. Other than him, I'm going to go down a little bit further, go down to 6,600, and I'm going to stay in that same game, and I'm going to go with the Bears with Tariq Cohen. Mr. Cohen is definitely in play for me. 6,600 here. He is... Let me just find his numbers here. He is 5,100 on DK. 5,100 on DK, man. His numbers are not that great. I mean, you see here he's only had 34 rushing yards per game, 2 TDs, averaging nearly 13 fantasy points per game. But as we can see, that 13, he's been smashing that the last 2 weeks as well. Been really starting to get more involved in his offense, and they're starting to lean on him to be someone that is a go-to guy, especially as a dual threat back. He's starting to show that he has the skill set to be a dual threat back for this team, because he's not only getting some touches between the tackles, he's also getting a lot of targets out of the backfield. 19.6 and 26.9, that's pretty much like 22 fantasy points per game. That's smashing his average by nearly 9-10 fantasy points per game over the last 2 games. So I love those numbers, just that alone. That was against Miami, against Tampa Bay, and he's going up against New England now. What I like also is that this is his overall numbers thus far. 32 rushes thus far this year, 170 yards, 1 touchdown. He has had 2 20+ rushing yards this year, rushes this year. He's been targeted 25 times with 21 receptions and 259 yards on 1 TD. In the red zone, he's had 4 opportunities, has rushed for 25 yards, no touchdowns as of yet. And then going up against New England. New England is 18th in rushing defense this year, giving up 110.7 yards per game. So obviously it has room here for Cohen to do very well with that. 4.5 yards per rush. And we have a gentleman here that is rushing at about 3.8 yards per rush. So I love that he has the opportunity to really be able to get a chunk of yards against this team. You got to also consider him. You also got to add up. You also have to consider here as well the pass defense for New England. They're 22nd in pass defense, giving up 269 yards per game and 7.1 yards per catch. 15 TDs, so obviously the door is open for him to do some justice. And then I didn't point out here, he had a 90-yard receiving game last week and 121 yards the game before that. So obviously he's been targeted more than he's been running between the tackles. But again, he's showing that he can definitely run between the tackles and be able to be a good pass receiver out of the backfield. Again, they're going to need that, again, with New England being 22nd in pass defense and giving up 269 yards and 15 touchdowns. I think Chicago is going to know that they could be able to run this guy not only between the tackles with Mr. Howard, but at the same time be able to use Mr. Cohen more so as that type of back like Mr. James White is for the New England Patriots in the same matchup. That is a great passer out of the backfield. Versus receivers, as far as fantasy points, I point that out the biggest because that is the critical number here. 40.7 DK points and 31.9 Fanduel points. And at running back, 25.5 and 21.2 Fanduel points and DK points given up to running backs. So there's room here for Cohen to be able to do very well as far as fantasy points. I can see him getting here the same as he's been averaging the last few days. I can see him getting 19 to as many as 20, 21 fantasy points in this game. Definitely need to get his targets out of the backfield and, of course, get some runs in between the tackle. In the red zone, the defense, as far as New England, 50%. Like I said before, we have mentioned it, 3.5 opportunities, the opponents per game only. The opponents have only been getting 1 touchdown and 1 field goal, so they have been very, very stingy in the red zone against opposition. The Chicago Bears come in, they have 60.6 conversion ratio thus far in the red zone this year. They have been in the red zone 3.5 times per game and averaging 2 touchdowns per game. So they're going to definitely need to get those 2 touchdowns here to keep this game close against New England. I could see where New England could possibly take the lead, and that's going to open up the doors for Cohen to get not only more passes out of the backfield and be more involved, because obviously Chicago doesn't have a whole lot of superstar weapons. Allen Robinson is their key guy, and now it seems that now Mitch Trubisky really loves Cohen, and of course he has Trey Burton as his tight end. So he has those 3 weapons that he can utilize, and I think Mr. Cohen is one of those key guys. And that's pretty much it, man. Again, anything can change from here to Saturday. By Saturday, I will know more or less if there's anybody else. And right here, offhand, I mean, you may consider Latavius Murray here. His price is really, really up against the Jets are pretty good. But I think come down here, Carlos Hyde, because he's pretty good in the red zone. They utilize him quite a bit. Going up against Tampa Bay may be an option. I think also Alex Collins may be someone to consider here. But New Orleans is very, very good up front. But he's another guy in the red zone is very, very good. I always love Matt Breida. Tough matchup against the Rams, but he may be someone to consider. I'm not on Howard. LaShawn McCoy is still very cheap. Peyton Barber against Cleveland. Cleveland definitely gives up a ton of yardage running. This may be a good spot for Peyton Barber, but again, I'm not too convinced on that. Again, I'll look at all that stuff and see if there's any possibilities down here. I mean, of course, you can always go with Frank Gore. Detroit definitely gives up quite a bit of fantasy points and yardage. I think they're in the lower tier as far as defending the run. So maybe Mr. Frank Gore is who's showing more like he is the one who's running the ball more for Miami. So he may be someone to consider. Again, I'll look over all those, and by Saturday night, I may have some more options for us. But again, those are the 3 for now. Again, nothing set in stone. Anything can happen any given Sunday, so just remember that. And by Saturday, I might be able to tell you if I'm going to stay with these 3, because you guys, if you follow me and you do watch, you know for a fact I go over them right away and tell you that I'm on them or not, or if I'm making any changes. So if there's any changes, I will definitely let you guys know Saturday night. So make sure you don't forget about the live show. Make sure you subscribe down to the channel. Make sure you put on those post notifications. This way you get that alert, you get that notification that the live show is coming. Again, appreciate you guys. Drop a like, and if and until the next video, man, hey, that's pretty much it.